one of my intentions was that authenticity, was to be able to find a platform. I would have never imagined how big the platform would have gotten, but to find a platform where I could speak a truth. Because for me, that was part of my healing. There was something therapeutic and symbolic for me in having my truth out there into the world, because for 20 some odd, almost 30 some years, I wasn't living that. I wasn't living that in the room, and I wasn't living that in my relationships.
Life is all about relationships. Lovers, family, body, or money. How satisfied you are can be completely explained by how you relate to things around you. This is Sophie Jaffe, and together with my husband, Dr. Adi Jaffe, we are here to explore and teach you how to maximize your relationships and achieve a happier life. Let's get ignited.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Relationship Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm doing one of those solo intros. We got back from vacation. Sophie's not feeling all that great. No, she does not have the COVID, but she's not feeling that great. And so I'm filling in because I've been sitting in my office all day, and sitting in front of a microphone and talking for another 10 minutes is something I can handle. And we wanted to get this episode to you right quick because today's guest is incredible. So I'm kind of going to fill in all the hats. I'm not as fun as Sophie, so I apologize for that ahead of time. Nicole, otherwise known as the Holistic Psychologist, will more than make up for it if you can just make it through these next few minutes for me, because I still want to do all the stuff we normally do. And we're going to start with the weekly review. So today's review comes from KL Const. I think that's how I pronounce it. I don't know. Thank you. I love both of your presence in my life. I follow you both on Instagram and recently started listening to your podcast. Thank you for all the great insight and advice and just being open and honest. Life isn't easy, but your positive outlook is something I look forward to. Well, thank you, KLC. And reach out to us. Instagram, info@ignited.com. Let us know who you are. And we're going to make our positive outlook on life show up to your doorstep with our Ignited and Philosophy care package. So let us know who you are, and we will take care of you. And thank you for being one of the listeners. If you listen and you've never left us a review, you really got to pause right now, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, why? Why not? Right? You listen. Why not just reach out and touch someone, preferably us? 5-star reviews are not necessary to get into the reading, because we've read some of the critical ones as well, but obviously we love those 5 stars. So if you want to give us one of those, that would be amazing. Since Sophie is not here, I'm going to do the quote too. Look at me just going for all of it. I'm going to pick a quote that Sophie actually shared on her own profile, and it's a quote by Sophie because I love my wife, and why not share more of her amazing, amazing stuff. And the quote is, "The more you love yourself, the less nonsense you'll tolerate." If you listen to some of the stuff we've released recently about radical transparency, this should speak deeply, deeply, deeply to you. It's kind of one of those funny things about reality that so many of us limit ourselves because we think that maybe what we have to give to the world is not enough, or maybe we're just not special enough, or maybe the thing that we're good at is not something that could ever be liked, popular, appreciated, celebrated, maybe even make us money, etc. And that's actually why I love Dr. Nicole's The Holistic Psychologist account, because when you talk to her, the way it came about is so serendipitous. But trust me, and you'll hear it more. The idea that sharing these little nuggets of wisdom that she's had on Instagram would become her career as a clinical psychologist and garner her almost 3 million followers on Instagram was not even a distant hope when she started doing this. And you can listen to the interview, so you'll learn a lot of lessons from that. But I want you to kind of dig in deeply and think to yourself, how many things that I love doing, that I'm good at, that I could share with the world, have I stopped myself from sharing because I just don't think they're enough? And I'll tell you, I see this in the groups that I lead, the Ignited groups, all the time. We don't see ourselves the way other people see us. What do I mean by that? How many times have you thought to yourself, oh my God, I've gained so much weight, and somebody just by happenstance just says something like, hey, you look really good. And you go, whoa, that's really weird. I see myself one way, they see me another way. Or maybe you're a writer and you wrote something just doesn't feel like it's going to resonate. You put it out and a ton of people reacted to it, right? And then on the flip side, sometimes you think something is amazing. I've written articles sometimes I thought were going to be incredible, and they just didn't connect with people. We don't see ourselves objectively. We just don't. We see ourselves through the lenses that we have put on and that have been put on us over the years. And so I love Nicole's amazing insight. I love this conversation that we have with her, because it is just one more piece of evidence that you do not know, and you better not limit yourself in terms of what you can and cannot do based on your pre-existing notions. You know, this clinical psychologist went completely against the grain, essentially doing exactly what you're not trained to do as a clinical psychologist, sharing herself, sharing these nuggets, not with people she's treating, just out into the world, and it's become a phenomenon. Take these lessons, apply them in their own life. Let us know how they resonate with you. Please, please, please. This is all for you. See you on the flip side. Hey everybody, D here, and I wanted to tell you about these new Blue Blocks glasses that I've been wearing. If you're on any of our chats, you might have actually literally seen me wear them, because the ones I wear have these yellow lenses. And I gotta tell you, I've tried other Blue Blocker glasses before, and they felt okay, right? I felt a little bit of a shift in the way that the screens that I'm staring at every single day affected me. But then I heard about Blue Blocks, and these guys really went to task. We just interviewed their founder. He's an amazing, amazing guy who really wanted to understand, how does light affect vision? And you know, I'm like the science guy here. So I wanted to tell you that there's nothing I put on. So they have Blue Blocks has 3 different levels of their lenses. Blue light, which are kind of like the ones you see a lot of people wear around. They're clear and help with the blue light coming in from screens. My favorites are the summer glow lenses. They're yellow lenses, and I swear I put these things on during the day and I can actually feel my anxiety go down. And that's what they're meant for. It's like the combination of color therapy and blue light blocking at the same time. And then on top of those, they created the Sleep Plus lens that is almost like a reddish orange. It blocks out almost all of the blue light that's coming your way, and so it's really, really great right before sleep. But here's the thing. These are amazing glasses that have actually been tested to block out the right frequencies of blue light. So if you're like me, especially during this time when we're staring at screens and Zoom and meetings and everything is happening online, you want to get these glasses, because I feel it. Literally, my sleep is better. My anxiety throughout the day is better when I put these things on. They're amazing. And we got you guys a special code. If you use the code IGNITED, just capital IGNTD, you'll get not only free shipping, but also 15% off. And these things are coming all the way from Australia, so you know you want to save on that shipping. All right, guys, check these out. They're amazing. This is the only company that actually backs their blue light blocking by scientific evidence that the right frequencies are being blocked. It's going to help change your life.
I haven't seen clients for probably almost about 6-7 months
Yeah.
ish time.
I think we all kind of like, that's how we all get started in different ways. And then we get our feet wet, and then we get the experience. Then we see where we really, you know, thrive. And then like, oh, wow, I could help so many more people if I go virtual, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was such a necessary piece of the work doing it individually, because I got to really understand the different people's processes of healing. Because I mean, I'm one person and we all have different experiences. So I actually think it was a necessary piece so that I could translate this work at scale.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we all have that same kind of, well, now let me touch more people, give these tools to more people. Let me have more impact.
Exactly.
100%. I mean, you know, that's the way I feel to a large extent. I didn't even go get my license. I was halfway through my licensure process when I actually decided I didn't like the system that I was about to enter, and felt that I would be more kind of bound by it than benefiting from it. And so I think one of the things I really wanted to talk about here today, and for everybody listening, because we introduced you in our intro earlier, but Dr. Nicole LePera, better known across the world as the Holistic Psychologist, on Instagram, etc., is here with us. And I want to talk about that transition for you, because I know for a lot of people in the helping field, but maybe particularly psychologists and psychiatrists, I feel like. The idea of engaging with people in a way that is not at all taught, not at all understood, not at all celebrated, maybe sometimes actually specifically looked down upon by other peers and colleagues, let alone mentors in our field, is a really scary thing. And you're a relatively recent entry into it. It's not like you've been doing this for 12 years, being on social media, doing the thing. So I'd love to hear maybe your journey of, okay, I get this really relatively traditional training, and then I jump into creating these really unique to you. You kind of started this trend of these self-help listicles almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's funny too, because I think it's like from the outside, to speak to your point, it does look like a jump coming from the traditional model to the way that I'm working now. But I think that there's been threads in my story and in how I kind of proceeded through the traditional training field that, was kind of little evidences of me being a little more on the outskirts of it. Because I think, to speak to the point that you're making, Andy, I very much too was very aware really early on in my training that there were some aspects of what I was being taught that didn't just fit. It didn't feel comfortable for who I am. So what those aspects are, coming through the traditional training field, as anyone who's been through there knows, we're taught very much, how to be in the room. And the main message of how to be in the room really removes, as far as I see it, a lot of the personhood, a lot of the individual, right? That makes me Nicole. The meaning, all of my past experiences, the uniqueness that is me. We're taught to be what a lot of us have maybe heard reference of, this blank slate, right? Just to play a function in the room. And that never really was comfortable for me. I always found myself being a little bit more on the individual side of things, pushing the boundary from these manualized treatments that I was being learned. I think another thread that I learned very early about myself is that in my personal life, as someone who very much was connected with the experience of anxiety, I am emblematically would have described myself for as long as I can remember as an anxious person. So I was struggling. And in my own personal struggles, I came upon a concept. This was many, many years ago now, when I was about 22. I'm going to be 38, so about 15 years ago. I discovered this concept of mindfulness. And meanwhile, at that time in my program, that wasn't necessarily being taught as a tool either. It was really the gold standard of CBT. Thankfully, I was in what was called a psychodynamic program. So I learned a little more about the interpersonal workings of people.
Where did you go to school?
I went to the New School in New York, which was a gift because in New York, the traditions of psychoanalysis, which I was very interested in, right? The idea that our past and our dynamics affect our present. So I started to go down those paths, also logging, this mindfulness thing seems important, seems like it could be helpful. So I would very much try to integrate that work into my clinical work of training as well. So I say that to say, I was kind of getting these intuitions, these pings that the program was limited, but I was still very much indoctrinated in the program, in the way of working. When I came out of the program, became licensed and started my own practice. That's what I thought was going to give me the flexibility of working in this more full, impactful way. And the short of it was, I didn't feel like I, as a human, was getting better. I was just continuing to see a lot of limitations in the old working. So flash forward to my own dark night of the soul, my own healing journey. And then I come with the desire, I've learned new tools, right? I've learned that we are a body attached to this mind of ours, and that there are some tools and techniques that I was really being impacted in my own healing that I wanted to share. And then upon sharing, of course, the social media world opened up to me. Well, what a great place to share, right? Here we are plugged in to the collective at this scale that many of us have never known before. And that's where, I was really met with this crossroads that I was excited on the one hand, like, wow, look at all this new stuff that is actually starting to feel impactful for me in my own healing that I'm hoping can impact the field. And on the other hand of that was a lot of fear and trepidation. And what will the field think? What will my peers think as I start to talk this new language or even be a person online in this new way? So that was really a big part of my early journey, was trying to find my path through speaking what was becoming my new truth, and also hesitant because of, I think, a lot of the way we were indoctrinated in the field.
So true. And I mean, there's so many elements to what you do that are, first of all, very different than psychodynamic therapeutic approaches, maybe more similar to CBT, but this idea of really succinctly summarizing therapeutic and psychological, emotional mindset concepts into easy to absorb lists or things that people can kind of take quickly and absorb into their life and benefit. It's almost, and I was just thinking about this as you were talking, people in wellness have been doing this for years. It's called like recipe books. Hey, you want to eat differently? Buy this book. It's got like a list of 12 things you got to put in a bowl. You mix them in this way together and you get this outcome. But in therapy, there has been this notion, and the online world in general is changing it. Corona has altered it because people have been trapped at home and had to figure out a different way to do it. But you're right. Being in the room together with another human was almost assumed to be a necessary component of the recipe. And so then, so true, so many therapists, so many psychologists are taught, especially physicians, maybe even, to not have a personality. Like, take yourself completely out of the equation. The idea of self-revelation, me talking about addiction, you talking about your anxiety, that's like taboo. Mm-hmm. Never, don't share anything about yourself because you're contributing to this transference, countertransference process. And here's the joke to me, and it was the joke to me when I had an advisor tell me specifically, do not talk about your own story. The reason I was told to do that was, he said, people will start believing that you have a mission, or you're like carrying a specific flag, or you have an agenda, versus that you're an objective kind of presence. And he was talking about it both from the research and the clinical standpoint. And here's the funny thing I realized: we are all subjective. We can't avoid it. I don't care what you're taught in school. I don't care who tells you to take yourself out of the room. Guess what? You're in the damn room.
Right.
And so now we're just pretending. And I think what I realized in my own life is when I pretend, I get sick. Yeah. When I pretend, I don't do well. When I pretend, I get anxious, I get depressed, I get in my head, I get trapped. And so it's really interesting. And I love seeing more and more people like you coming out of the woodwork to help the field adjust its own perception of what it's here to do. Because look, helping fatigue and, all these things, compassion fatigue, all these things that happen, burnout in our fields, the turnover in the mental health field is insane. It's insane. Like, people don't know this, but there's like something like 70% turnover in most addiction and mental health kind of clinics. And I think what we're talking about right now is part of the reason that happens. Yeah. Is I can't not be me. And so when you tell me that I have to walk into a room and leave that elsewhere, it literally hurts, right? Like it psychologically, mentally, physiologically affects who I am. And I'm hearing for you got all this training in how to help people with anxiety, and then you get out of it and you're still struggling with your own anxiety, even though you do work that obviously you love.
Yeah, I think that misalignment, that's the word that I use, Adi, when I think about this, really contributed, that outside of self. And for me, that was my general resting state. So what I mean when I say that is, I believe a lot of us that go into this field or that gravitate toward it, right? Or I'm just using the traditional, like, universal way. We refer, right? The helpers, the caretakers, right? The fixers. We can all, I think, identify with a personality characteristic, most of us, that led us be the helping, or desire to be the helping professional that we are. And what I've come to realize is, I call that conditioning, right? That's a pattern. That's, as far as I see it, how we learn to show up in our relationships. For me and for many of us, I feel like we are predisposed. That conditioned pattern sets us up to do that really successfully. I was really good at being that blank slate because I was doing that in all of my other relationships too. I didn't show my authentic self with her needs and her wants and her feelings to most, if any, of my relationships because of my own childhood dynamics and because of how I learned to show up putting other people before me. I also, as a result of feeling chronically overwhelmed in childhood with limited emotional support, the way I learned to cope was I dissociated. So now I even had this great, I call it my spaceship, this great place I went to be distanced from my feelings. So when I say I was set up to be a blank slate, I mean, I was, right? And I was good at it. I would come into, at least so I believed myself to be. I thought very good at that. However, to speak to your point, it was taking this underlying toll on me day after day after day. And I believe living out of that alignment, right? Not being able to be embodied in the room because I was taught not to by my parents, right? In my conditioning, and then by my field, kind of give me all the reasons why not to. Before I knew it, all of these feelings got to the point of eruption. And that's when I think they broke through for me. I actually started to have physical symptoms being in the room. I was losing my words. I couldn't actually be present to the clients in front of me. And in my opinion, what you experienced was what contributed to my breakdown, which is why when I said I went online, and one of my intentions was that authenticity, was to be able to find a platform. I would have never imagined how big the platform would have gotten, but to find a platform where I could speak a truth. Because for me, that was part of my healing. There was something therapeutic and symbolic for me in having my truth out there into the world, because for 20 some odd, almost 30 some years, I wasn't living that. I wasn't living that in the room, and I wasn't living that in my relationships.
I feel like I love your work. It's really beautiful and really refreshing. It's, the same work that Adi and I echo in our relationship. And, we've been through cheating and lies and, married adultery and not married. And, we have 3 kids. And so we share those struggles very openly now on the podcast. It's really what initiated the podcast to begin at all, was because we wanted a longer format of telling our story. Even though we were sharing it on social media, it's like easy to kind of get lost, in that short paragraph. So we wanted to expand. And so this podcast is all about radical transparency. That's really, what we strive for in our relationship. And Adi with his addictions, healing through his addictions, and then helping his clients really helped. That was the link. And that's what helped us heal and helped us crawl out of that cycle we were in of like just hurting each other and lying and taking things personally, was like just showing up exactly as we are, flawed, authentic, and radically transparent, even when it's really tough. And it's funny because even when Adi and I went into therapy with our first therapist, who, bless her heart, had no idea what she was getting into, but we kind of proposed this radical transparency. We didn't have a name for it, but I was like, I want to know every single detail of every single person he's ever been with, whether it's a kiss, whether, and this was crazy to her at the time. She was like, I will hold space for this, but I don't think this is a great idea. Mm-hmm. And we went on from there, and it's like he and I tuned into that like vibration of what would heal us. And I love that on your platform, you talk about self-healing, because like that is what we unlocked, was the ability to heal ourselves. And we use different tools to do so now, like from substances to like our even just talking about it on our platforms and in our own friendships and relationships. But I really want to hear more from you about this idea of self-healing.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to commend both of you, because I think what has been so attractive to me, kind of as you became into my ethers, knowing about your work, was that, that radical, I call it radical honesty. And I believe it begins, and a reason why so many of us struggle, right, whether it's a therapist to hold space or hear someone else's truth, it's because the work begins within. I mean, the most cliched thing, but the most real reality that we live, right? Meaning so many of us are lying to ourselves. I know I did. I know I had all of these narratives, I call them stories, right? About myself, my past, my way in the world, my part I play in relationships, my future. I had all these stories, and I wasn't being fully honest. I was only telling myself part of the story. So in my opinion, radical honesty, transparency, and this is why I value it so much now, it begins first and foremost with me acknowledging truths to myself, which are oftentimes quite uncomfortable truths. And then I can give that gift of transparency to whether it's my partner, like the two of you are beautifully doing, or my community, or the world at scale, whomever it is. And I don't see that we get there until we give our gift of honesty to ourselves. And that's hard as hell. So I commend the two of you. And I definitely think it's been part of my own healing, self-healing journey as well. So you saw something, okay, did you want to say?
No, go ahead.
You said something earlier about the therapy room. And this is where the concept of self-healing really comes from. You're never going to hear me tell people or dissuade people from having that therapeutic experience with somebody. Right? Like we are taught, and that is necessary for a lot of our healing journeys. I've been in many types of therapy over the course of my journey so far. What I mean when I say self-healing is I have now come to the awareness that anything we're doing for a limited amount of time, whether it's a 1 hour a week therapy session, which is the few that are privileged enough to be able to afford therapy can get, is that 1 hour, right? Whether it's the gym that we go to maybe one hour a week, right? Anything we're doing, maybe it's even a transformative, I heard you say medications, like maybe it's a transformative, psychedelic weekend we went to do. One time, one thing, in my opinion, can't combat that daily, I call it the autopilot, the daily subconscious that's running the patterns that are causing us that stuckness.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say self-healing. It's what are the rest of the things that we can do, that we can harness, now understanding that there is a new science out there that is real and valid called epigenetics, which gives us a bit of power back, which says, yes, we are all gifted with, certain genetic components. And then we have everything we do every day. And it's those decisions that we make in terms of our lifestyle. What are we eating? How much are we sleeping? How do we manage stress? That really impact, that play a role, right, in whether or not those genes are going to express. So that becomes the point of questioning then. Okay, what are those choices then you're making outside of this 1 hour, wherever you're spending it? So yes, therapy is important, right? These experiences that we give ourselves, these workshop weekends, or all of these things are important. But what I mean when I say self-healing is, what does the rest of your day-to-day life look like? What are those patterns and those conditioned stuck points that are causing most of us to continue to live in our past and not in a newly created future that's different?
This brings up a conversation I just had with the people. So I run a lot of online groups, and one of them happens on Tuesdays. So yesterday we were talking, and it's an addiction group. And so there's been this, within that group in particular, there have been a couple of people who had been having a hard time sharing the fact that they had slipped up and hadn't been sober for the last couple of meetings. And my whole thing is about creating a very safe space. Kind of fuck shame is one of our big mottos, right? Like, hey, you're not perfect. None of us are perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. And so it's funny in the conversation that we're having, because as soon as I heard about it, part of me took it personally. That's the ego, the wound, the part of me that's like, I'm here to help. How dare they do this to me? Kind of a crappy story in my own head, right? But then when we got into in the meeting, what I was talking to them about was exactly what you're saying right now, which is this idea that, look, we're here for the 1 time a week. Maybe some of you come into my second group, you go to some of the other things. That's all great, but it starts between your ears. And for me, the question that I ask them is, how do we treat that voice? How do we address that voice in our head that tells us we're not enough, that tells us we're damaged, that uses any small misstep, right? Sometimes it could be the tiniest little thing, like somebody didn't smile at you the way you thought that they would, or you sent a text and somebody didn't respond within 15 minutes, or whatever your internal marker is. And then that internal voice that can always question and always pick at us comes in. And for a lot of people that I work with who struggle with their self-image and self-esteem and efficacy and agency, the voice is, I'm a failure. I've always been a failure. I knew it. People know it. I have to keep pretending. And everything else around us is this protective mechanism to not let people in to the knowledge that this internal vulnerability exists. And what you just said, the reason I think this is such an important part of self-healing, we spent an hour yesterday talking about it. Your healing starts from the understanding that voice is not reality, and that your job is almost to release as much of that voice as you feel comfortable doing at every given moment. Because the moment you release this expectation that you are isolated and alone in this feeling, and that everybody is just 1 second away from realizing that you're really a failure, but in fact, it's just this internal, you talked about it, this programming that you've had, right? The learning, the conditioning you've had over your lifetime. We've been taught that we're supposed to pretend we're good. But I found in my work, I don't know with how many hundreds or thousands of people at this point, that it's actually the opposite. The more real we get with people about our actual internal process, the more real other people feel like they can get with us. And that's where true intimacy comes from. That's where deep connections come from. When Sophie was asking for that in therapy, it was scary. It was scary for me because the idea was, oh my God, but if she really knows what's happening in my head, she's going to leave me. And it was scary for the therapist because we're told, all of us, over and over and over, hey, share what works, keep the rest, and work on it yourself in your own sessions. Don't cross that boundary.
Yeah, I love that. That's really, really powerful. And I love your fuck shame, kind of mantra. And I second that. And this is why I talk so much about, the past and our childhood and conditioning. Because I've come to find in myself and in the many that I've worked and now just in the community members, there is such incredible shame because we are watching ourselves, and there are so many moments. I can't tell you how many moments I sat in my old practice with clients, right? Speaking from the very conscious, rational prefrontal cortex lobe, right? Where we can be very insightful and be distanced from these patterns and come up with all of these great things that we're going to do differently the next time to avoid, right? That trap, that thing that happened. And then the person comes back in the next week and, head hung in shame is kind of relaying that it didn't work. And I know maybe they spoke it, maybe they didn't, more often they didn't. Underneath, I'm coming to realize this is that confirmation that I'm broken. I can't do this. I can't change. There's something wrong with me. Why can't I just do this new thing when I really need to? And this is why I talk so heavily, about, I have a lot of parents. I always talking about parents and the role they play. It's because I want to offer the people, I offer the collective really relief from the shame that I think so many of us are living under. So I commend the work that the two of you are also putting out, because it is about that honesty and it is about learning how to be honest with ourselves so then we can then develop that intimacy with someone else where our whole story, it's safe enough, to tell our whole story to someone else. And this might not apply to all of the relationships, that listeners find themselves in. But it's learning the discretion, and learning how to create the safety in some of the relationships that we have so that we can, and to speak to your point between the ears, right? It all begins up here. A lot of what we're fearing too is not in the current moment. Let me put it that way, right? A lot of us are avoiding a past pain that was very real for us, that rejection, that I'm not good enough, right? That someone left me feeling that very much happened. A lot of us are desperately keeping ourselves safe from that threat that for many of us isn't present. So when we do become vulnerable and when we do share, and I don't suggest we just pull back the curtain and air it all out, right? It's kind of like a window of tolerance. You begin to let people in a little more because the gift of that not only is becoming closer in intimacy and honesty, the gift of that is each time I share something, and of course I'm going to be fearful. What will this person do? Will they not love me? Maybe I won't hear from them again. When none of that happens and when the person's still there on the other side of the relationship, right? When we walk through that fear, now I can feel a little safer telling that person that same thing, maybe a little more that next time.
Yeah, I love that. And you talk about parenting your inner child. Can you explain what this means to our listeners?
Absolutely. So another realization I'm having is that in that part of the mind that I'm always talking about that was completely left out of any of our training, really the subconscious part of the mind, right, where all that condition, the patterning, the autopilots live, in there lives what I call the inner child, which is essentially the repository or the place where we've stored, right, all of our unmet needs or the ways that we've learned to meet our needs, maybe not as it works for us as the unique individual that we are in terms of our physical needs, our emotional needs, our spiritual needs. Right. In that repository, if you will, is all of our suppressed emotions, right? The emotions that we maybe didn't feel safe or didn't learn how to express and allow out into the world, right? And then our stories, our wounding, all of the narratives that we've created about ourselves, our others, our relationships, our future, right? All of that lives in our subconscious. So what I mean when I say that other part of the time, right? When you're not in that prefrontal cortex, when you're not in therapy, when you're not conscious, and using all those mental faculties, I think the the percentage is somewhere up 95% of the day, whatever. You're being run right by that autopilot. So to speak to the point we were talking about earlier really beautifully, we are all subjective. We are viewing our current moment, just to use this language, through lenses, the way I call it, or filters. And that inner child, those wounds, those unmet needs, those stories are one of the predominant filters that we're viewing our daily experience through. So this is a large reason why we're stuck. Either you're someone who the ways you've learned to meet your needs, your physical, emotional, and spiritual needs, don't actually align, right, with how you need them met. Because remember, we're unique. And we were raised by caregivers that might have modeled behaviors that worked for them, or maybe it didn't even work for them, but that's all they knew. Doesn't mean it actually works for us. Some of us didn't even get modeled behaviors in these areas. For me, the reason why I went on my spaceship is because my family as a whole had very little emotional tools. We only really dealt in stress, and we did not deal with it successfully. It would be, the fire would light the house up of stress, and until the thing was resolved, typically when something or someone outside of the house made it better, right, then the stress would go away. So I was largely not taught emotional coping skills like a lot of us aren't, right? So we need to explore for ourselves, what are our patterns? What are the ways that we've learned or been modeled how to meet needs? And what a lot of us come to the conclusion in adulthood is either you're like myself and some area of needs were largely unmet, and or the way you learn to meet them don't work for you anymore. Then the process is learning new ways in adulthood, those new care behaviors, how to identify our needs in those areas, how to meet them, right? And then some of the inner child work for a lot of us is understanding those filters, right? What are the narratives that we're running life through that were real at a time, right? I'm not cared for. My particular one is I'm not considered, right? Having a family that was putting out the latest fire left me a lot of the time alone in whatever was happening in my own little kid world. So looking back, I can minimize that and be like, well, nothing really happened when you were a little kid. I'm sure you were fine. But when you're alone to deal with the world and your emotions as a little child, it does feel very, very, very overwhelming, right? So in adulthood, reparenting is about acknowledging that inner child that lives within each of us, acknowledging the unmet needs. For me, acknowledging that story of I'm not considered, that I was viewing all of my experiences through, and then learning a new way to meet our needs, and then learning a new way to understand maybe those stories through a different frame.
I have a question. What if there's an adult that you love, someone in your life that like you see so clearly needs to dig in, needs to uncover their childhood wounds, needs to do the work, needs to heal. Maybe they've hit a couple rock bottoms, but they don't learn the lessons from that. What do you do when you love someone? Maybe you're in a relationship with them. Maybe they're in your family. Do you give up? Do you help them see in some way? Do you allow them to just like, what is the key? What is the medicine? I'm sure it's unique to the individual, but we have people that come to us in crisis in relationships as individuals. And then also I have loved ones in my life that I just feel are stuck and I don't know what the bridge is. I don't know how to help them see.
Yeah.
Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend.
Hey, I know a lot of these friends. It's funny you guys asked me this. I just started to do a new monthly segment, question and answer on my YouTube. So every month I'll do a Q&A and then I'll, let them in the comments ask me the next question for that. Long story short, I've only unrolled it for 2 months so far. We're on our third month. And the first 2 months of questions are, how can I help? How can I get someone to heal? And then the follow-up question for the next month, because it was such an asked question, was what do I do if my whomever, partner, friend, mom doesn't want to heal? So this is asked a lot. It's really painful to watch someone we love from what for most of us is more of an objective vantage point, right? We're not them, but for them, from that simple, kind of reality, we are not them, we are more objective. So for a lot of us, we do see patterns in someone else a bit clearer than they might see themselves. Depending on how close that person is to us, the more difficult it is to experience them struggle, right? Because we're energetic beings. When someone we love is struggling, we can feel that, to a different degree. And then obviously you have the complication of what kind of relationship are you in with this person? Is this someone with whom you're living? Does it make it more complicated then for you to navigate your day to day, based on whatever is going on for them, etc.? The short answer that I always give, that I know is the answer that is not popular, is we can't change someone. We can't get someone else to heal. As far as I see it, healing is an individually chosen journey. It is a journey. It takes daily commitment to showing up and to exploring yourself in this new way and to showing up differently. And it's hard. So with that said, while, maybe you have tried and gave someone an ultimatum and they've done something new or, kind of honored your request for a little bit of time, I think we've all had that experience where before we know it, we go right back into those old behaviors because it has to be chosen. So the short of it is we can't will someone or force someone into healing. And my advice is always the same, right? I understand, I'm sensitive to how difficult it is when you're living with this person, and right, you have that space of the relationship now that is going to be impacted by how this other person shows up. But I think if we keep our eyes, on ourselves and our own healing, beautiful things happen. Because one thing that happens quite often is we put our head down, we do the work, we maybe create boundaries if there are, right, kind of actual day-to-day issues that, we're struggling with in the home or what have you, right? We set up the space for us to be able to focus on our own healing. And then one of two things happens. We go through our journey, and the things that were such a problem that we needed the person to change, we become surprised that dynamics have shifted. Right? That we experience this relationship in a new way, or that we can, right? And that we now have created a new space for us in the experience of the relationship. I guess there's three things that happen. The second thing that can happen is the person that is watching you. They're watching you change. They're watching your life shift in possibly positive ways. That might be enough to inspire that fire within that person. So you might motivate in a more indirect way over time. And then the third thing that happens, we might come to realize in some of these relationships that we need to change our dynamic in them, that we want to interact differently. We want to maybe limit or change or whatever it is. But then we have the empowerment and the tools to do that.
Yeah. I think I love that you started out prefacing the thing that you're going to give the answer people don't want. Look, we all want simple answers. We really do, right? We want the pill, the switch, the single exercise that will give us the abs, the single food that will make our brain better than ever before. We all want that. And the most difficult answer to give people is they don't exist, like ever.
Yeah.
Whenever you're looking for the single silver bullet that exists, it only exists in books and fairy tales and stories. It never happens in reality. Even this whole idea of transparency, right? It sounds so nice. I'll just be transparent. But guess what? Sometimes it's going to bring a lot of friction and pain. First of all, that doesn't always mean you're doing the wrong work. Secondly, it doesn't mean that, like you said, it might have been the wrong person to share it with. Maybe they weren't ready to do it, right? I have this example I've started using for the last, maybe I need to make a little video about this. But I've been using it more and more with the groups that I work with sometimes. I said, look, buying your kid a set of golf clubs and taking them to the golf course and getting them a golf coach every day and really reinforcing them and showing them PGA Tour videos, etc., does not guarantee that your kid will become Tiger Woods.
Or that they'll even like it.
But not getting them golf clubs, not taking them to the course, not getting them a coach, and not ever taking them out to play guarantees they won't. And the thing that we have to understand is the tools don't guarantee an outcome. And just be careful, right? Like if somebody tells you, I have the proven formula, they're lying to you. It's just because anybody, and that's what I love about your work so much, right? Anybody who's really honest about what they do says, look, I have all these tools. These tools have worked for a lot of people. Some people run the other way and don't like them. All I can do is I can expose you to the work that I know how to do. I can share the knowledge and the experience I have with you. If it resonates and if you take the tools, it'll greatly increase the probability that you will walk in the direction that these things are meant to take you in. But life is what life is. I can't predict circumstances. I have no control over the rest of the universe. I have no control over the other people in your life. I don't even have control over what the people I teach the tools do with the tools.
Yeah.
And that can be scary for people. It can be unnerving, but I think it also introduces this really beautiful element of individuality into the equation. Like you know, I want to talk a little bit about what it has felt like to go from, I don't know, 20 followers when you first started, whatever it was when you first started, to 2.5 million people who absorb these messages you have, because the scale is immense, right? There's no way you would have been able to do this in a private practice, no matter how long you lived. Like you could live till 507 and you wouldn't be in that place. And I want to talk about what it feels like to kind of, it's a little scary, right? You put these tools out into the world and then talk about having no control how people implement them or how they absorb them. I think there's a power and a responsibility, I feel like, almost, that comes along with having this massive voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first challenge was, so like I said, I was always challenged by this idea that there was these manualized treatments. Yes, I did go through, like I said, the protocol of learning how to do CBT, and I have the manual and I know how to do it. And again, just something didn't sit with that being the way, that there's too much individual variability and difference, that it just didn't sit right. And then of course, as I armed myself with the tools and really understood, and I was quoted on I think a past podcast, and then someone made a meme out of it, and I actually really liked it, where I was calling it a menu of healing. And I think that's the evolution and the learning that I've had to go in terms of my own self. Because when I was working one-on-one, right, I had one person in front of me, the dynamic between the two of us, right? I could formulate and understand what that work would look like. Now, as I met with, let me try to translate this to a scale where a couple things, I'm not even possibly in contact with these people. I mean, very early on I came online to speak my truth and to possibly find a community of like-minded individuals. I never would have imagined this truth would have spread, creating this platform as it was. What I came to realize, though, very early on is that people tucked in all different regions of the earth at this point were messaging me that they learned about breath work through me, and now they've been doing it and they feel calmer in their nervous system. So what I was met with is, okay, these are people out there that are interested in this. So this is where I began, let me learn how to teach at this scale, right? How do I show people a menu of tools? How do I translate it in understandable language? Because something I continue to be met with myself. I'm really interested in a lot of things. I love science. I love esoteric and spirituality. And I've done a whole lot of reading in all of these areas. And what I came to find is there was a lack of translation. There was a lot of good stuff that people are putting out there, but they're not, I don't think, making it approachable for people who aren't interested in science as heavily as I am, or in spirituality as I am. So my goal was, how do I translate these tools in a way that's understandable, in a way that's usable in a daily practical way? And then how do I do it to meet the needs of so many varied individuals that may not even be interacting with me? And that was the first challenge. And then it was how do I learn how to do that? How do I learn how to put that out there? And then there was the person, the me behind the messenger. Because what started to happen quickly is, as I started to see the numbers grow meteorically, like beyond what I would have imagined, quite quickly in the beginning, my little human, my little child inside that's healing. Now listen how ironic this is, that only ever wanted to remember, be considered, right, by this mother who was ever distracted. I mean, now I found myself being considered, right, by growing numbers of people each and every day. That little child within who desperately wanted that was never so uncomfortable. Yeah, so on the personal side of my own journey, it was this whole evolution in my own healing now, because here I am, right, speaking my truth, which, remind you, was difficult, was not something I did in my past relationships, even with people close to me. Now I'm speaking it to thousands, 10,000s, right, soon millions. And I'm showing myself, I'm being considered. And both of those things, on a personal note, were challenging, were very, very, very challenging for me. I had that voice, right? Who am I? Why are you listening to me? Don't listen to me. Don't look at me. All of those feelings would come up, and still do. I mean, of course, as I continue to meet people and I continue to be offered opportunities and to see and interact with humans at this level, there's a lot, for me internally that maps onto my own healing journey in many ways.
That's beautiful. And then you get to take other people on that journey with you, right? Which is, you keep learning. That's the other thing that I think happens. I don't want to say always, there's continuing education, et cetera, in the field. but it's nice not to get stuck in your own world and kind of get exposure to all these things from the outside.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. And I share, and part of it too is I use this in my own challenges. You'll hear me just as equally sharing tools, for dealing with codependency. You'll also hear me talking about this, right? Last week I did a meditation and my inner child was frightened, and I share. So back to this kind of concept of transparency, right? I do speak those truths as well to the community. And I think what it does, it allows us to continue to break the veil down, to see everyone as humans, to speak to the point you beautifully made earlier, Adi, to be able to hear stories and to learn the discretion to take the parts that resonate, to use the tools that resonate and to leave the aspects that don't, because that's the byproduct, right? We are so individual that, and I don't want people to take my whole story to heal exactly as I did. I don't think that that's the answer here. Don't map yourself onto my journey exactly, because you're not me. I just want to empower people to have the confidence to see the menu of tools, to learn the process of reconnecting with that self within, and then finding their way in their own healing journey.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for this work. I mean, I think the field in general needs to evolve as the world changes. And so it's beautiful to see your platform grow, and this, like you just said, this translation of what in the past was held on to kind of like only the select few get to have this knowledge, right? And you then get to come to us, to our office, and we will hand it to you like manna from the gods. You're now sort of democratizing the whole process, which is really, really beautiful to watch. And I see this proliferation of more and more of that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. That means a lot. And if I can just empower one person to take that choice is a word I say so much, to take choice back, to know that they do have choices and can heal and can, find their path through all of the hard stuff that's happened into a new future that's different. And I say this because why I also share my story is, if you would have spoken to me a decade ago, you wouldn't have heard this. Yeah. You would have heard, I'm stuck, I'm limited. This is what I'm capable of. This is what I'm not capable of. I mean, I had myself down, or so I thought.
Sure.
So that's why I talk so often about it too, is because I can relate. I can relate being so stuck in my beliefs that kept me stuck. And now I continue to experience the expansion and the empowerment that comes with choice on a daily basis. And if I can gift that to one human, I mean, that, in my opinion, has changed my life.
Totally.
We always ask our guests 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind, the best advice that you've ever received.
Best advice I ever received is subjectivity. I learned very early on in a training program. Actually, this caught my mind when you brought up a story earlier, Adi. I was graciously offered the awareness that everyone is subjective. It was around a clinical point. I was sitting in a clinical supervision around the concept of anxiety, actually. And I had a supervisor gift me with, don't assume. If you're hearing someone speak a word of an experience that you've lived, don't assume that it was lived the way you lived it, right? So when someone across from me says, Nicole, I'm anxious, what my mind will do, because we're subjective, it just painted the story of my anxiety and handed it to that person. When anxiety is so subjectively different. So the short of it was ask someone what they need, ask what it was for them. That to me was not only clinically life-changing, but personally, now that I embody that, life-changing.
Oh, that's beautiful. You've had so many transformations. I can't wait to hear the answer to this one. What has been one of your proudest moments to date? Oh gosh,
I have so many transformations. My proudest moment to date is, and there are micro moments, every time that I lived with a fight or flight response that was at the ready. And everything would trigger it. The mail being late when I thought I needed this piece of mail to, actual things. So on the daily, quite honestly, I have victories where I can see and live a moment that I know historically, right, would have sent me into some sort. So right now, for instance, I have a passport that I was supposed to go on a trip that is not arriving and might not arrive. So we've changed the location of my trip as a result of it. Historically, I wouldn't have been able to stop thinking about this passport and the catastrophe that this, has caused my travel. So on the daily, I am met with having that space where I don't just snap into some cataclysmic, the world is ending response, and I have space for something new and a new choice. So every day, I'm proud of myself because, like I said, I was so caught in that that fight or flight response, that I was just discharging it all day long for anything and everything.
Wow.
Wow.
What about on the flip side? What has been one of your most challenging or difficult moments?
Still, I'm challenged with my feelings. I'm challenged with sharing my feelings with other people because first and foremost, my road back to my body to feel my feelings was difficult. And now I'm in that really critical space of how do I authentically, to speak to the work you do, share this? And there's still fear. It's still hard for me to speak my feelings.
Yep, same.
So speaking of that, the fourth question is, especially for those of us who do this helpful work and are out there serving, it can take a toll and it can be hard on us. What are some of your non-negotiable self-care skills that you bring to your own life on a regular basis to show up as the best that you can?
Yeah. So boundaries is the number one top thing, whether that's around time, energy, emotions, right? Creating limits. I mean, now I have an endless stream of, engagement on social media. I would be morning, noon, and night, right? But I put time limits around that. I create space for me outside of work. The morning time is sacred for me. I try to protect a couple hours in the morning before I dive into work to do my meditating and my moving of my body. Boundaries is incredible. That's the practical. The psychological work that I constantly do is I try to get really good at differentiating feedback, right? Allowing feedback in from people, hearing it, trying it on for size, and understanding that a large portion of feedback that people give you is more about them than about me. That's why I say differentiating. Not to say I throw all feedback out. I can't hear anything. I know me. No, some feedback, like I said earlier, is really helpful. It's objective. It's someone who's not me, gazing upon me, maybe helping me in some way with a blind spot. But we need to learn to differentiate. So psychologically, learning how to depersonalize the different, messages that could be reflected back about what your message, may or may not be, has been incredibly helpful. Learning how to separate out and not take ownership over everyone out there, because I cannot control everyone's reaction to the words I say and the filters through which they view the words I say.
I also find that don't you feel like the more you grow, the easier that becomes because you're getting so much noise and because you're getting so much static energy back. It's like, it also gives you some sort of like a thicker skin in lots of ways. Like, okay, like I'm not going to take, there's just so much of it. And I can't even imagine at your level, like it must be even more but the more you put yourself out there and the more your heart is out and your emotions and your feelings and your personal story, the more that people want to interject their feelings and thoughts. And some of it is constructive. Most of it is noise.
Most of it
is noise.
Yeah. And there's growing pains. So on the front end, I think before you get to that resiliency on the back end, I'm not saying I do this successfully. I spent many moments in darkness, crying, fearful of, oh my gosh, are these things that people are saying about, questioning myself, and then allowing myself the time with boundaries to be centered, to reground myself and to remind myself who I am. And 100%. The more you do that, the more you can become resilient on the other side. I'm not going to paint the picture as a smooth ride. Definitely not. No. For me, we're human.
Yeah. Yeah. And then our final question is, this podcast is called Ignited. What ignites you?
What ignites me? Life. Now that I'm here experiencing it, that on the daily ignites me, from just being able to be present when I'm sitting on that beach in the morning, right? And not just have my shell of a body there. I'm lost in thought, because that's where I spent so much of my time, somewhere else, worrying about what I have to do next. I love to-do lists, right? So even the moment where I'm on the beach and I'm hearing the waves and I'm feeling my body on the beach, that's igniting, because from that moment comes all possibility. Now,
it's beautiful.
I love that.
Thanks again, Nicole, so much for the work you do and for coming on here and sharing this wisdom with our people. Really beautiful to watch the growth and the impact that these principles are having at the scale that you've reached them. So again, thank you so much. For those of you listening right now, obviously follow at the Holistic Psychologist if you aren't already. And also, take a screenshot right now and just tag Nicole and us, Sophie and me, and Ignited, and let us know which one of these tips resonated the most for you. We always love hearing what landed for you all.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Nicole. Keep in touch.
Thank you both. Thank you, Adi and Sophie. This was great, and I'm really excited to be connected with your community. Thank you.
Have an amazing day.
You too.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Ignited podcast. We were so happy to have you along for this ride. Please go and subscribe to this. Leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And if you want more, don't forget to go to ignited.com, where all the podcast episodes are available with show notes and so many of the little details and links from each one of these interviews. And you can look at all the future events that we have going on, all the things that make Ignited so special, even beyond this recording. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week.